For 518 years, one family ruled the Korean peninsula. 27 monarchs sat on the throne of Joseon, an unbroken line stretching from 1392, when a general named Yi Sung-gae seized power and founded a dynasty, into the 20th century. To put that in perspective, the House of Yi outlasted the Tudors, the Stuarts, the Bourbons, and the Romanovs. It was still ruling when the American Civil War ended, and it had governed Korea longer than most European nations had existed as unified states. They built palaces of painted timber and green tile in the heart of Seoul. They maintained a Confucian bureaucracy so sophisticated that its record-keeping now sits on the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. They performed ancestral rites at the Jongmyo Shrine passed down generation to generation for more than 5 centuries. And in 1897, after decades of foreign pressure, their king declared himself an emperor, renamed his country the Great Han Empire, and raised an altar in the middle of his capital to announce that Korea answered to no one. 13 years later it was gone. Not diminished, not reduced. Gone. A single treaty of 8 articles, signed on the 22nd of August 1910, transferred sovereignty over the entire Korean peninsula to the Empire of Japan. The emperor refused to put his name to it. It did not matter. The empire he had inherited was dissolved anyway, and the family that had ruled Korea for 5 centuries was not executed, not exiled, not even formally deposed. Something stranger happened. They were absorbed. The conquering empire took the Korean royal house, folded it into its own aristocracy, gave its members Japanese titles, Japanese educations, Japanese uniforms, and Japanese wives, and kept them alive as living ornaments of a country that no longer existed. And that is the part almost nobody outside Korea knows. Because what happened next is not a family fading quietly into obscurity. It is the story of a boy taken across the sea and returned a general in his conqueror's army, of a princess who spent 15 years inside a Tokyo psychiatric hospital while her country forgot she was alive, of a prince killed by the atomic bomb at Hiroshima, whose body reached Korean soil on the exact day the war ended, of a crown prince whose own government refused to let him come home, and who finally crossed the border in 1963 unconscious on a stretcher, carried off a plane into a country he had not seen since he was a child. And it ends on the 16th of July 2005 in a hotel room in Tokyo, where a 73-year-old architect named Yigu was found dead of a heart attack, alone. He had been born in that exact building. It had been his father's mansion before the war, sold off and converted into a hotel, and the last heir of a 500-year dynasty came to rest on the precise square of earth where his life began. This is the full story of what happened to Korea's royal family after the empire fell, and it is stranger and more complicated than the version most people have heard. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what the House of Yi actually was, because it was not a European monarchy, and that comparison misleads more than it helps. Shuzhen was founded in 1392 as a Confucian state, and its kings ruled through an elaborate scholarly bureaucracy rather than a warrior aristocracy. Officials were selected by examination. Court historians recorded the king's daily words. In annals he himself was forbidden to read. The dynasty produced the Korean alphabet, Hangul, commissioned under King Sejong and still used by more than 75 million people today. This was not a family that ruled by conquest. It ruled by ritual and by an idea of moral legitimacy so embedded in Korean life that when it was removed, the country did not simply lose a government, it lost the organizing principle of its identity. By the late 19th century, that principle was under siege. Korea had spent centuries as a tributary of China, largely closed to the outside world, and in 1876 Japan forced it open with a treaty modeled on the ones Western powers had used on Japan itself a generation earlier. What followed was 30 years of the peninsula being fought over by China, Russia, and Japan, with the Korean court increasingly unable to control its own affairs. King Gojong, who came to the throne in 1863 as a boy of 11, modernized where he could and played the powers against each other. He and his queen, Empress Myeongsung, leaned toward Russia as a counterweight to Japan, and that calculation produced the most shocking event of the period. On the 8th of October 1895, a group of Japanese agents and collaborators entered Gyeongbokgung Palace and assassinated the queen inside her own residence. It remains one of the most notorious acts in modern East Asian history, and Japan's own inquiry produced no meaningful punishment. Gojong understood exactly what the killing meant. He was not safe in his own palace. In February 1896, he did something no Korean monarch had ever done. He slipped out in a sedan chair and took refuge in the Russian legation in Seoul, governing from a foreign embassy for a full year. When he emerged, he made his most defiant move. On the 12th of October 1897, at a newly built circular altar in the center of Seoul, he proclaimed the Great Han Empire and took the title of emperor. It was a declaration of absolute sovereign equality with China and Japan. He built streetcars and electric lighting in Seoul, sent students abroad, and tried to construct a modern state at emergency speed. He was running out of time. The end came in 3 compressed blows. In 1905, after Japan defeated Russia, the Yulsa Treaty stripped Korea of control over its own foreign policy and installed a Japanese resident general in Seoul. Gojong never signed it and spent 2 years insisting it was invalid. In 1907, he made his last gamble. He secretly dispatched emissaries to the Second Hague Peace Conference in the Netherlands to plead Korea's case before the assembled powers of the world. They were refused admission. The delegates would not hear them. When Japan discovered what he had done, the retaliation was immediate. In July 1907, Gojong was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, and the Korean army was disbanded weeks later. In December of that same year, the new emperor's 10-year-old half-brother Yi-un was put on a ship to Japan, officially to receive a modern education, in reality as something much closer to a hostage. The resident general, Ito Hirobumi, arranged it. The boy's mother died in 1911 without seeing him again. The new emperor, Sunjong, reigned 3 years with almost no power at all. He was 33, in fragile health, and had reportedly never fully recovered from a poisoning attempt in his youth, in which contaminated coffee was served at court. His reign was a formality, while Japan dismantled what remained of the Korean state. Then, on the 22nd of August 1910, the Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty was sealed. Its first article ceded all rights of sovereignty over the whole of Korea, permanently and completely. Sunjong refused to sign it. The signature on the document belongs to his Prime Minister, Lee Won-young, a name that has functioned as a synonym for betrayal in Korea ever since. The treaty was promulgated on the 29th of August, a date Koreans call the National Humiliation. Within a week, the country's name had been officially changed back to Joseon, and the Korean Empire had ceased to exist after 13 years. Now, here is where the story diverges from every other imperial collapse of the 20th century. The Romanovs were killed. The Habsburgs were banished by law. The Ottomans were stripped of citizenship and expelled with hours to pack. The Korean royal family got something arguably more insidious. They were kept. Under the annexation, members of the House of Yi were formally incorporated into the Japanese imperial system as a category called the Okozoku, a royal caste that was neither Japanese nor foreign, and dozens of other Korean nobles were absorbed into the Japanese peerage. Sunjong was demoted to King Yi of Cheongdeok Palace. Gojong became the Grand King. They kept parts of their palaces, received large annual allowances from the Japanese treasury, and were photographed at ceremonies, given medals, and addressed with elaborate courtesy. And every part of it was a cage, a colonial office, the Yi royal family office, administered their lives, their finances, and their movements, staffed by officials reporting to the Japanese Governor-General. Gyeongbokgung, the primary royal palace, was systematically dismantled. Hundreds of its structures were sold off or demolished, and in 1926 a massive Japanese government general building was completed directly in front of it, physically blocking the palace from view along the main axis of the city. Everyone understood what that said. The family that had ruled Korea for 500 years was now a heritage exhibit, funded and displayed by the government that had ended them. Gojong lived 9 years under that arrangement in Doksugung Palace, watching his country be reorganized around him. He died there at dawn on the 21st of January 1919, aged 66. The official cause was given as a cerebral hemorrhage. Almost immediately, rumors spread through Seoul that he had been poisoned, and posters appeared accusing the Japanese authorities of murdering him. No credible evidence has ever emerged to confirm it, and historians remain divided. What is not in dispute is what the rumor did. Thousands gathered outside Doksugung to mourn, and students and religious leaders chose the days around his funeral to act. On the 1st of March 1919, a Declaration of Independence was read aloud in Seoul, and the country erupted. The march, first movement, spread to hundreds of towns and was suppressed with force. Korean sources recorded tens of thousands of arrests. It failed to win independence, but it produced the Korean Provisional Government in Shanghai. A dead emperor, powerless in life, had detonated the largest uprising in Korean history simply by dying. 7 years later, it happened again. Sunjong died at Cheongdeok-gung in April 1926, aged 52, without children. Japanese authorities, having learned from 1919, moved 7,000 troops into Seoul and anchored naval vessels at Pusan and Incheon before the funeral. It did not work. On the 10th of June, the day of the state funeral, Korean students launched coordinated protests along the route. Around 200 were arrested. It became the June 10th movement, and in 2020 the South Korean government designated the date a national commemoration. Both of Korea's last emperors accomplished more against the occupation and death than either managed in life. Sunjong left behind a widow, and her story is one of the least known of the entire family. Empress Sunjong, born Lady Yoon of the Hepyeong Yoon clan, had married him in 1907 when she was 12 or 13. She was the only woman ever to hold the title of Empress of Korea, held it for 3 years before being demoted to Queen Yi, and then outlived her husband by 4 decades. She stayed at Cheongdeok-gung through the colonial period, through liberation, and into the Korean War, when North Korean soldiers entered the palace grounds. Accounts of that confrontation have been embellished over the years, but what is documented is that she remained as long as she could before evacuating south to Busan with other members of the family. And when the war ended, the last Empress of Korea discovered that her own country's government would not let her go home. President Syngman Rhee's administration, wary of any surviving symbol of the old monarchy, blocked her return to Changdeokgung and housed her instead in a modest cottage in the Jungneung area of Seoul. Only after Rhee's government fell in the April Revolution of 1960 was she permitted back, moving into Naksanje, a small, unpainted residential compound in a corner of Changdeokgung that would become the last home of the Korean imperial family. She was 66. She took Buddhist vows, rose at 5 in the morning to read scripture, and died there on the 3rd of February 1966, aged 72. The only empress Korea ever had, spent her last years in a few rooms of a palace her family no longer owned, at the pleasure of a republic that regarded her as an inconvenience. But the center of the family's story after 1910 was not in Seoul at all. It was in Tokyo, and it belonged to that 10-year-old boy taken across the sea in December 1907. Yi-un, the seventh son of Kojong, grew up almost entirely inside the Japanese establishment, attending the Gakushuin, the school of the Japanese peerage. The Meiji Emperor took a personal interest in him, reportedly showing him more attention than his own grandchildren. He graduated from the Imperial Japanese Army Academy in 1917 and the Army Staff College in 1923, then spent his entire adult career as a Japanese officer, commanding a regiment, teaching at the military academy, serving with forces in northern China, and eventually reaching the rank of lieutenant general in the army of the country that had annexed his own. He was simultaneously the last crown prince of Korea and a general of the Empire of Japan. There is no clean way to describe that, and Koreans have argued about it for a century. His marriage was arranged with the same logic. In 1920, he married Princess Masako of Nashimoto, of a cadet branch of the Japanese imperial house. The wedding had been scheduled for January 1919 and was postponed when Kojong died. The intent was widely understood in Korea, a dynastic merger designed to dissolve the Korean royal line into the Japanese one. What nobody anticipated was that the marriage would become genuinely close, and that Masako, who took the Korean name Yi Bangja, would eventually become one of the most beloved figures in modern South Korea. Their first child, a son named Yi-jin, was born in 1921. In the spring of 1922, the couple brought the infant to Seoul. The first visit home Yi-un had been permitted in years. The baby died there suddenly, aged around 8 months. Rumors of poisoning circulated then and have circulated ever since. They have never been substantiated. What is certain is that the couple buried their first son in Korea and returned to Tokyo without him. A second son, Yi-gu, was born in Tokyo on the 29th of December 1931 in the family's mansion in the Kyoicho district. Then there was the youngest daughter, and if you want to understand why this story still generates films, novels, and national arguments in Korea, her life is the reason. Princess Deogye was born on the 25th of May, 1912, 2 years after the annexation, when Kojong was 59. She was the child of his old age, and, by every account, his favorite. He built a kindergarten inside Deoksugung Palace so she could be educated there, and is said to have arranged an engagement for her in secret, hoping to shield her from a Japanese marriage. He died when she was 6. In 1925, aged 13, Deokye was taken to Japan to be educated, exactly as her half-brother had been 18 years earlier. She was placed in the Gakushuin among the daughters of the Japanese aristocracy, where she was reportedly isolated and unhappy. Her mother died in 1929, and Deokye was not permitted to observe Korean mourning customs. Her health deteriorated badly, and around 1930 she was diagnosed with what doctors of the era called dementia praecox, a term that today would broadly correspond to schizophrenia. When her condition improved slightly, the Japanese court moved immediately. On the 8th of May 1931, aged 18, she was married to Count So Tagiyuki, head of the family that had historically governed Tsushima. In Korea, the match was received as a calculated humiliation, a deliberate demotion of an imperial princess to the level of a provincial Japanese nobleman. A daughter, Masai, known in Korean as Chunghae, was born in August 1932. Tokei's condition relapsed afterward and never meaningfully recovered. By 1933, she had been admitted to psychiatric care, and in 1946 she entered Matsuzawa Hospital in Tokyo, where she remained for roughly 15 years. When Japan's defeat abolished the peerage in 1947, her husband lost his title and income, the household staff were dismissed, and in 1955 the marriage was formally dissolved. The following year, her daughter Masai disappeared in the mountains of Yamanashi Prefecture after leaving a note. She was never found. Deokye, by then largely unable to communicate, may never have fully understood what had happened. She would almost certainly have died in that hospital if not for a single Korean journalist. Kim Woo-han campaigned for years to have her brought home, writing to the South Korean government and lobbying anyone who would listen. His letter survives and has since been displayed at the National Palace Museum of Korea. After Ri's fall, the campaign succeeded. On the 26th of January 1962, 37 years after she had been taken away, Princess Tokye landed in Seoul. She was 49. Photographs from that day show a small woman being helped down the aircraft steps by a nurse, surrounded by reporters, saying nothing. She was taken directly to hospital. And here is the detail everyone in Korea remembers. Despite the state of her health, once settled at Naksanjay, she was observed performing court etiquette correctly. Whatever else had gone, the palace protocol she learned as a small girl in Deoksugung was still there. While the crown prince and the princess were in Japan, another branch of the family took the opposite path entirely, and it complicates any idea of the Yi family as passive collaborators. Prince Uchin, personal name Yi Kang, was Gojong's fifth son, born in 1877. The half-brother passed over for the succession in 1907 in favor of the 10-year-old Yi Un because his own base at court was weak. He was known for drinking and for an enormous number of children, and Japanese authorities regarded him as unserious. That was a mistake. In November 1919, in the wake of the March 1st uprising, Prince Uchin attempted to escape Korea in disguise to reach Shanghai and join the Korean Provisional Government in exile. He got as far as Andong, on the Manchurian border, before being detected and forcibly returned. Had he succeeded, a son of the last emperor would have been sitting in the exile government of a country Japan insisted no longer existed. He spent the rest of the colonial period under close supervision and died in 1955. His sons carried the same streak. Prince Yiwu, born in Seoul in 1912, was adopted as a child into the senior line of Anhyeongung and taken to Japan for education like the rest. Unlike almost everyone in his generation, he refused to assimilate. When the Japanese court tried to arrange a marriage for him with a minor Japanese noblewoman, he refused and instead married a Korean, Lady Park Chanju, in 1935. He built a military career anyway, rising to lieutenant colonel by June 1945, and served in China, where unverified claims persist that he quietly assisted Korean exile networks. In the summer of 1945, he was transferred to a staff post in Hiroshima. On the morning of the 6th of August, he was on his way to his office when the atomic bomb was detonated over the city. He was mortally wounded and died the following day, aged 32. His body was returned to Korea and buried on the 15th of August 1945, the day Japan surrendered and Korea was liberated after 35 years. A grandson of Emperor Gojong was laid in Korean ground on the exact day Korea became free, killed in the uniform of the empire that had taken it. In 1970, Korean residents of Hiroshima privately funded a memorial near where he had been found, dedicated to Prince Yiwu and to the tens of thousands of other Korean victims of the bombing. It stands in the Peace Memorial Park today. Liberation should have been the family's restoration. It was the opposite. In 1947, under the new Japanese constitution, the collateral branches of the imperial house lost their status, and with them went the Okozoku category that had defined the Korean royals. The allowances stopped, the tax liabilities did not. The Kyocho mansion in Tokyo, completed in 1930, had to be given up. It eventually became the Akasaka Prince Hotel. And because Korea was now independent, Yi Un was no longer a Japanese subject either. For a period he was, in the most literal legal sense, stateless. He eventually took Japanese citizenship because there was no other option. There was, in theory, another option. He could have gone home. He requested permission repeatedly, and the government of the Republic of Korea refused. President Syngman Rhee, himself a distant descendant of the Joseon royal line through a cadet branch, had no intention of admitting a living crown prince into a new republic still defining itself. Royal properties were absorbed by the state. In 1960, Rhee offered Yi Un the post of Korean ambassador to the court of St. James, which would have kept him in London and out of Seoul. Yi Un declined, citing his health. He had suffered a stroke in 1959 while in the United States. By August 1961, he was hospitalized in Tokyo and did not leave. What changed was a coup. After Rhee's government collapsed in 1960 and Park Chung-hee took power in 1961, the policy reversed. Park had the Korean government take over the former crown prince's medical costs and move to restore the family's nationality. Dalkye came home in January 1962, and in November 1963, 56 years after a small boy had been put on a ship at the age of 10, Yi Un finally returned to Korea. He was carried off the aircraft unconscious, suffering from cerebral thrombosis, and taken directly to hospital. He never recovered. He spent 7 years bedridden, first in hospital and then at Naksanjay, in the same small compound where his sister lived out her own last years. He died there on the 1st of May 1970, aged 72. In 1973, with Park's approval, his spirit tablet was installed at Jongmyo Shrine according to the ancient rites, the last time that ceremony was performed for a Korean crown prince. His widow did not leave. Yi Bang-ja, the Japanese princess married to him as an instrument of colonial policy, chose to remain in Korea after his death. in a country where anti-Japanese feeling was intense and where she had every reason to expect hostility. Instead, she spent her last 2 decades building institutions for children with disabilities, founding schools and welfare organizations at a time when such services in Korea barely existed. She sold her own jewelry to fund them and raised money by exhibiting her calligraphy and painting. Over time, Korean opinion moved from suspicion to something close to affection. She died at Naksanjae on the 30th of April 1989, at 87. Princess Daeke had died in the same compound 9 days earlier, on the 21st of April, aged 76. The two women, one the emperor's daughter and one the conqueror's, had lived side by side in the last corner of the last palace, and they left within a week and a half of each other. With them went the generation that had personally witnessed the empire, which brings the story to the son and to the hotel room. Yigu was born in Tokyo in 1931, spoke Japanese as his first language, and was 14 when the empire that had raised his family collapsed. Educated in Japan and then, with American assistance, in the United States, he studied architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and graduated in the mid-1950s. He then worked in New York for I.M. Pei, one of the most significant architects of the 20th century. Consider the trajectory, the heir to a 500-year Confucian dynasty drafting modernist buildings in a Manhattan office. In New York, he met Julia Mullick, an American designer in the same firm, born in Philadelphia in 1923 to a family of Ukrainian descent. They married in October 1959. When Park Chung-hee's government reopened Korea to the family, the couple moved to Seoul in 1963, taking up residence at Naksanjae alongside his mother. He lectured on architecture at Seoul National University and Yonsei University and went into business. Julia, who spoke no Korean when she arrived, threw herself into charitable work with her mother-in-law, opened a clothing business to help fund it, and later described those years as the happiest of her life. The business ventures failed. An engineering enterprise collapsed. An airline venture went bankrupt at the end of the 1970s, and Yigu, deeply in debt, returned to Japan to earn his way out. Then came the decision that defines how the 20th century treated this family. The couple had no biological children. They had adopted a daughter, Eugenia, in 1969. In the eyes of the clan elders, the imperial line was ending. In 1982, under sustained pressure from relatives who wanted him to remarry and produce an heir, Yi divorced Julia. He never remarried, neither did she. Julia Mullick stayed in Korea for years afterward, continuing the welfare work and never quite being acknowledged by the family she had married into. Because the marriage had not been conducted according to Korean royal custom, she was never entered in the household register. She moved to Hawaii in the 1990s and died in a care facility in Honolulu on the 26th of November 2017, aged 94. Her ashes were scattered in the Pacific. Asked once whether she resented her former husband, she is reported to have answered with a question of her own about whether she had to. Yigu's final decades were unsettled. He moved between Tokyo and Seoul, attempted a permanent return in 1996, struggled to adapt, and drifted back to Japan. On the 16th of July 2005, he was found dead of a heart attack in a room at the Grand Prince Hotel Akasaka, aged 73. And the address was the address of his birth. The hotel stood on the site of the Kyoicho mansion where he was born in December 1931, the house his family had been forced to sell when the Japanese peerage was abolished. He had traveled the entire arc of the 20th century, from Tokyo to Cambridge to Manhattan to Seoul, and finished exactly where he started, in a building that no longer belonged to anyone he was related to. His funeral, on the 24th of July 2005, was held with traditional royal rites and drew significant public attention in South Korea. He was buried near his parents' graves in Namyeongju. Julia, who had not been invited, is reported to have watched from a distance and visited the grave afterward, alone. And then the argument started. Yigu had no heir. 6 days before his death, according to the Jeonju Lee Royal Family Association, he met the association's chairman and signed to adopt his first cousin once removed, Yi-won, born in 1962, a grandson of Prince Huichin. On the 22nd of July 2005, the association confirmed him as successor. The problem is that such an adoption carries no legal weight under South Korean law. The constitution does not recognize titles of nobility, and Yi-won is legally an ordinary citizen. He had worked in the corporate sector, lives with his family in an apartment in Goyang outside Seoul, and presides over the Jongmyo ancestral rites as ritual head of the house. He was immediately contested. Lee Hae-won, a daughter of Prince Huichin born in 1919, rejected the arrangement, and in September 2006 a private ceremony was held at which a separate association declared her Empress of Korea. Other family members did not recognize it. She had spent much of her life in ordinary and at times difficult circumstances, and died in February 2020 at the age of 100. And then there is Yi-suk, who has had by far the strangest life of any of them. Born in 1941 at Sadong Palace, the son of Prince Huichin, he was 4 when the empire's world ended and 9 when the Korean War drove his family into poverty. In the 1960s, to support his mother, he sang for a living in hotels and at American military bases, performing Western standards for foreign audiences. And in the late 1960s, he had a genuine hit, a gentle song called Pigeon House that became a wedding standard in Korea. For a few years, a grandson of Emperor Gojong was a working pop singer. It did not last. The family had been receiving a state subsidy under Park Chung-hee. After Park's assassination, in 1979 and the change of government that followed, the subsidy was discontinued, and Yi-suk was required to leave the royal residence he had been living in. In 1980, he went to the United States, where he spent years without secure status, doing whatever work he could find, including mowing lawns and cleaning swimming pools. He returned to Korea in 1989 and lived for a period in a boarding house. In 2004, the city of Jeonju, the ancestral seat of the clan, offered him a role promoting its heritage and installed him at a traditional hanok in the Jeonju Hanok village, where he still lives and has hosted presidents and ambassadors. He became a history lecturer at Jeonju University and has spent 2 decades publicly arguing for a symbolic constitutional monarchy alongside the republic. He also rejects Yi-won's claim, and in 2018 he adopted a Korean-American entrepreneur, Andrew Lee, and held a ceremony in Beverly Hills naming him Crown Prince, an event covered with a mixture of fascination and skepticism in the Korean press. So there are at present competing claimants to the headship of a throne abolished in 1910, recognized by rival private associations, in a country whose constitution rules out any such thing. It would be easy to treat that as farce. It is more useful as evidence because the disputes are not about power. Nobody involved is going to rule anything. They are fighting over custody of a symbol, and the reason that symbol still has value tells you something about modern Korea, because the physical inheritance is gone. The palaces belong to the state, restored at enormous expense over decades. The Japanese government general building, erected in front of Gyeongbokgung, was demolished in the mid-1990s in a deliberate act of national reclamation. Cheongdeokgung is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Naksan-jae, where the last 3 members of the family lived out their lives, is open to visitors who walk through rooms occupied until 1989 by people born into an empire. What survived was the ritual. The Jongmyo Jeri, the royal ancestral rites, are still performed annually at the Jongmyo Shrine in Seoul, with the same music and choreography, inscribed by UNESCO as intangible cultural heritage. Yi-won presides. The Jeonju Lee Royal Family Association, with roots in the Joseon-era Office of Royal Genealogy, maintains the records and organizes the ceremonies. Descendants of the Jeonju Lee clan number in the millions across Korea. Since 5 centuries produced a great many cadet branches. The dynasty did not vanish. It dissolved into the population of the country it had ruled, and Korean culture has spent the last 20 years excavating all of it. Princess Do-kye's life became a best-selling novel and then a major feature film in 2016. Prince Yi-woo has been portrayed on screen. Documentaries have been made about Julia Mullick. A generation that never lived under a monarchy has gone looking for the people who did and found a story far less flattering to everyone involved and far more human than the simple version of heroes and traitors, because that is finally what makes this family's afterlife different from the Habsburgs, the Ottomans, or the Romanovs. Those dynasties fell and were expelled, and the story after that is exile, poverty, and the long argument over whether they should return. The House of Yi was never expelled. It was captured, dressed in its enemy's uniform, given an allowance, and paraded. Its crown prince became a general in the army occupying his own country. Its princess was married into the family of a Japanese count. Its grandson died at Hiroshima wearing Japanese rank insignia and was buried on the day Korea was liberated. And when liberation came, the family found that its own countrymen had no use for it either. They were not martyrs. Some of them made choices Koreans still find difficult. They were also not simply collaborators. Some resisted, and some paid for it. What they mostly were for the better part of a century was trapped. A 13-year-old girl taken abroad and returned at 49, a man who did not see his country between the ages of 10 and 66, and who was unconscious when he crossed the border. A woman from the conquering nation who stayed to build schools for children nobody else was helping. An architect trained by one of the great modernists who died in a hotel standing on his own birthplace. There is a question underneath all of it that has nothing to do with Korea specifically. When a country's oldest institution is destroyed, what exactly is lost? Not the buildings, which can be rebuilt, and Korea rebuilt them. Not the wealth, which was seized. What is lost is continuity, and it turns out to be recoverable, just not in the form anyone expects. Korea did not restore its monarchy. It restored its palaces, its rights, and its stories, and left the family as private citizens arguing gently over a title that no longer exists. 518 years, 27 monarchs, 2 emperors, 1 treaty. The empire lasted 13 years. The aftermath has now run more than a century, and everyone born under Korean imperial rule is gone. What remains is a shrine in Central Seoul where, once a year, a man who spent his career in a corporate office puts on ceremonial robes and performs a rite for ancestors who ruled a country that has not existed since 1910 before an audience that mostly came to take photographs. Whether that is a tragedy or a kind of survival is difficult to say. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps that is what always happens when a dynasty outlives its purpose. The crown goes, the palaces become museums, the descendants become ordinary, and what is left is the ceremony, performed carefully because someone decided it was worth remembering. If you found this story as compelling as I did, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and lets me keep making these deep dives into the families that history swallowed, and drop a comment below. Should the Korean royal family have been allowed home sooner? Does a republic owe anything to the dynasty it replaced? I'll see you in the next one.